Hi everyone, I am Kawadi. I have been a Live2D artist for a couple years now, and I figured I would dive into the world of making tutorials for people and how to create different VTuber models and things like that. We're going to start this series by doing a proper art mesh or mesh around your model. So if you have a model already ready to import into Live2D and you've opened up Live2D and you think, oh wow, that's very overwhelming, where do I start? Starting with the art mesh is the perfect thing. So let's get into it. So here we have a model that I just imported. There's a couple different things that I noticed that I have to adjust later in terms of the artwork. Most of the time you do need to have everything kind of separated from your left and your rights, and apparently I imported this model and I did not do that. However, for this tutorial I don't really need to show any of that because we're just going over art meshing. So I want to go over, whenever you import your model, you click on whatever, right? Whatever piece, whatever layer, it's going to have this square box around it. So this is the mesh, right? The mesh is very important because if you try, the mesh is ultimately what helps you move. It determines how things move. Not necessarily helps you move, but it determines how things move in the model. So a proper mesh can do wonders, and if you do not have a proper mesh, things can work a little not to your favor. There is manually meshing things and there's automatically meshing things. Now, for some things like the body, you can get away with doing a standard automatic mesh on them, and it would be okay. For some things like small details like the hair or the eyes, you might want to take into consideration to manually mesh it, and that way you have better control, and I'll show you why. So first, we're gonna see, if I do this, I can move this around, but the only guide of the mesh, right, is this square box. If I wanted to move it like from the middle on, you know, or whatever, I can't do that. And that's because it's basically like bounded to this box. So it can only really move in the way that the box is letting it move for the mesh. So I've clicked on this manual mesh. I'm going to show how to manual mesh. We're going to take our eraser tool here. And my Live2D setup might look a little different than yours. I kind of move my things around. So if you hold on your keypad the letter B, you can, and then you click your left mouse, you can, if you drag it one way, it gets bigger. If you drag it the other way, it gets smaller. This isn't actually something I learned until way later. But yeah, you can do that and it'll adjust the size. So, and that trick can be used for a couple other things too. So I'm going to erase these boxes. Now, to manually mesh, we would then click on the add point tool. And with certain things like hair, I fully believe manually meshing, as much as it can be a little bit of a pain in the butt, manually meshing is very important. And I'll show you why. So, I'm going to show you, if you say are meshing and see how I'm meshing kind of, I'm going to do this really quickly here. We're meshing not quite outside the box. And then I'll just say, yeah, that's complete. Well, now you can see it's actually cropped out some of the art piece, and we don't want that. This can also happen if you automatically mesh things. We want to avoid it. And so it is always a good idea to double check the mesh even when you automatically mesh it, because it can delete things. So when I'm manually meshing, I want to be able to have, over something that's such an important detail like this, I want to be able to have as much control as I can. So I am actually going to, you can click it one by one here if you wanted to, or you can press the stroke mesh mapping. So if you do that, I'm actually going to go down. I'm going to go down to here, and the number of verticals within mesh, which means the number of points. If you see that, it says 2, and you can see it created almost like 2 walls, right? I'm going to delete that, and I'm actually just going to go to 1. And I am going to take this and draw my general guide around here. Now, I'm going to adjust this however I want to make sure that it's following around this piece of hair exactly how I want it to. Now, we're not looking at the green, we're looking at these little points, right? The green is just the general guide. So the good thing is that when you're using this pen tool, you don't have to be that precise, you don't have to be perfect. And then I'll show you a better way as well right after this. Is we have the mesh width and the repeated density. So the width would be more so if we had it at 2, it makes it bigger or smaller. We're not doing that right now, so we're just doing the 1. But I am going to put that back to 10. So we're going to do repeated density, which creates more points in our mesh, right? So it's, for me, a little bit more important that hair has them a little bit closer. And as you can see, doing that created, you might need to go back and redo some of this. Doing that created a better point for this. I'm going to confirm this. And then I want to connect these 2 dots here. And you can go back and you can click on them and readjust them. I'm editing this by, you can even just click on this too, but to add the extra point to connect them, you would need to be on the add point tool. So now that we've done that, I'm going to go back here and I'm going to do that again around that. So creating this double layer of mesh like this, of these mesh points like this, around the outside of our targeted layer gives me control over the outskirts of that layer, which to me is very important. And I feel like that is typically, for myself, again, when I rig, that is typically what I am more picky with rather than the inside. Now, there are certain items depending on the model, where I might think that the inside is a little bit more important, depending on what's going on. If it's like a graphic on, like some kind of graphic design on a shirt or something, then I might want to create specific meshes around that design of the art piece. But for things like the hair, I like that to be as specific as possible around the outside of it. And then we're gonna connect this like so. Now, what I am going to do is I'm going to click auto connect, but I'm going to go back to the eraser and I'm going to slim this down. This is how I specifically mesh hair. And I'm going to delete all the connecting points. So what it's doing right now is it's connecting these meshes. I want the meshes on the outside to be connected, but I do not want them to be connected on the inside. And I'll kind of show an example why in a minute. And it really is about how it moves when I'm rigging it. Go to this top point, and I can see kind of like a separation in the hair, specifically right here in this specific piece. So I'm going to now at this point make my own line manually, though I could do it with the pen tool as well, but I'm just going to do it manually and click my way down here. And so this is going to make me feel like I have more control over everything happening on the center of the hair. Sometimes I might do maybe 2 center points, you know, depending on what's going on with that hair piece. Now I'm going to repress auto connect, and that connects my whole mesh. So we're going to go back here. And I'm just gonna use this tool to show you. I'm also using the button, the shortcut B trick with this as well. You can use it with your brush deformation, or you can use it with the brush selection. But anyways, now I can move the hair in a different way rather than when it was in the box, right? So I'm able to actually control those points a little bit better. And say if this is a tool that we use sometimes as well. Say if I'm using this, I have much better control of it like that than say if I were here and I were to use that on this one. Because this one has no mesh, it does not warp the same because it's only bound to that mesh box that automatically generates for each layer in the beginning. Now, we can do an auto mesh, as I mentioned, that is a feature. When the auto mesh generator pops up here, normally when you start, I don't have any other, you can make a preset for it if you want, but normally, what you can do is you can, let's say standard, there's little, and there's heavy. Now, I do think in the beginning for me, and I don't know if this is a normal thing for most people when they start learning, I just clicked deformation heavy on everything. Certain things can affect the model file and actually make the model file harder and heavier to run. So if every little thing is having a very heavy mesh on it, it can slow down, the computer can slow down Live2D, it can make the model a little bit harder to run. So that's why it's more important for the smaller details that you care about, but the bigger details, the ones that people don't see too much, a lot of the times when you're streaming, it's really from like, you know, the stomach up. I always just do the bust up, you know, and they kind of flow a little bit easier. I tend to do just a standard mesh on those. And there are times where I just do a light mesh on them, so it depends. But if we do that, this will not kind of, I mean, it doesn't move terribly if I were to heavy deform it, but I feel like the way that I personally do it for myself is, and then you can kind of see it is a little bit, this is with the lighter mesh, I think, or the more standard mesh. It doesn't move in the best way, and the hair is a very important detail. I prefer just to do it in this way of manually meshing, specifically the hair pieces for myself. I feel like I get the most movement when I do it in the way that I do it. It is good to experiment and do it however you would like. Now, one more thing I would like to show, if we go back to this hair piece, is going back to mesh mapping pen. I'm just going to draw a line straight down, and I'll go back over here. Another way to use this mesh tool, and I would not use it on hair in this way, but just to show, is obviously 1 creates a line of 1. If you do 2, it'll create a column of 2. And the reason why it looks a little bit more organized at this point than it was before is because the repeated density is lower. You can put this at 3, and that is going to kind of do this, which could be very beneficial. Now I'm going to show something real quick, because you can do the width and make that bigger, right? Or if it's like that, you could actually hold control and press the yellow circle and move it out. And that will move that, you know, individually at a key point. There's another key point over here. We could do the same, and we can just create another one right there. It's almost like using the B trick, but on there as well. I'm going to cancel. And sometimes that is just a little bit better for, again, normally these would be separated. I need to go back and I need to separate that and then re-import this, but that would be really good for something like the eye. The eyes are really important to do a manual. Honestly, most things on the face I do manual meshes for, unless it's like the nose. So we're gonna make these key points here, right? Because the eye starts out and it's slimmer, so I'm gonna slim that down a little bit. And then as we get to the end here, you could make it a little bit bigger. So something like that might be okay. I tend to want this to not be too big, actually, but just for the sake of like the quick editing in that moment. And I might want the repeated density to be a little bit less, meaning having more points here. But that is another way to do meshes. I do that method a lot on the legs as well. And then if you wanted more in the middle, more control in the middle here, you could press 4 division. With the eyes, you don't really need it. I use that specifically with the legs, sometimes with the arms. I never really use that on the eyes because that is a lot of little pieces and you don't really need it that much for something so small, though it would be extremely accurate. And there we go. That is just a very quick, simple introductory to Live2D and meshes. It actually, for some reason, whenever I was looking up tutorial videos myself, when I was getting into Live2D, I was never fully explained what meshes really are. It was always really brief. And it wasn't until I've paid for a lot of Live2D classes at this point. I've done a lot, I watch even now I'll still watch people's tutorials just to see how they might do things, you know, because you never know. Sometimes you might find a method that works better for you. But for some reason, I had realized probably about a year and a half or so, almost 2 years in, that no one ever properly explained meshes to me. It was like I always had a tiny bit of an idea, but having a proper explanation probably would have gotten me a lot farther sooner. And having a proper mesh around things is very important. Now you want to do the mesh typically first before you start rigging anything. So the next time I have a video, you're going to see this model is going to be completely meshed and separated how she should be. And then we can actually start moving on to explaining things like warp deformers and things like that. So I will see you then. I hope that this video was hopefully beneficial and educational to people. If not, I'm sorry. I tried my best. But hopefully in the future I will have more things to explain to you guys and before we really get into rigging, so you guys can have a little bit more of a better knowledge on Live2D before you really start getting into it. So see you soon.